Hey guys, welcome back. So this will be the third part of the e-fuel install on the Lawn Ranger project. Now, the first two we covered mounting in the valley via Marty's recommendations, and then also mounting the filter setup and setting it all up via Marty's specifications. Now this third video is going to be, what did we do different? Where does this bracket come into play? All right, so follow along with this. We're going to show you how we're going to do a little bit different setup on this, and we're going to be using a couple more fittings. So we have some more fittings and we bought those, and I'm going to go over those with you. So we'll go over the fittings and then we'll go ahead and show you what we're going to be doing differently in this truck here. So here's our fittings that we have here. So this little section here, we have 390s, a 45, and 2 straights. These are what comes with the Marty's kit, this right here, this little piece here. When you buy the OBS kit, this is the set of fittings that comes with. All right, so not going to really talk about these too much because we may end up using all of these. We may not use any of these. So we're just going to push these aside for now. And I want to talk a little bit about what we got here. Now, I ordered more fittings than I absolutely need. There's no way that we're going to use all of these fittings in this build. However, I wanted to make sure that I had enough of everything in case I needed to do something a little bit different, because we are changing the frame setup, and you'll see that here in a little bit. And we're going to change the regulator setup as well, which you'll also see here in a little bit. Now, I had mentioned that we were going to be changing up the fuel feed and supply lines and stuff like that. So we're going to be using a set of adapters. So we have a 3/8 and a 5/16 tube adapter here. So these will convert hardline to AN or JIC. And I bought 2 3/8 and 2 5/16. I will probably not use all 4 of these. So we'll probably just use one of each. Okay. So we'll be using these in the valley for sure. I don't know if we're going to need any of these back on the frame rail. As far as the filter bases are mounted, I bought a 90 here. So I may use the 90. I may use this direct 120. Now, the reason I have the 90 is because I do want to make a loop back, and this will go together like this. And this will give me a 180-degree turn out of the fuel system pumps. Okay. Now, if this doesn't clear the filter head, as you can see, it's a little bit closer, then I can use this setup. So we're going to see what fits, and that's why I ended up buying more than what I absolutely needed. But I did buy 2 more 90s, 2 more 45s, and 3 straights. And then we have the quick disconnect style here, and we bought a 90, 2 straights, and then they come with clamps. Now you can use these with this hose as well, but this is all extra from here this way. These are all extra pieces. These are all purchased from Marty's Diesel Performance. So he does offer bits and pieces like this. And if you don't see something on his website that you may need or want, you can always contact him and see if he can get it, because his prices for this stuff was relatively reasonable. So if you want to go to your local speed shop and buy something like this tube adapter, or even go to, like, say, Summit Racing or Jegs, you can buy these there as well. Different brands, but they may be more money, they may be cheaper, but Marty's has a very good selection for a very good price, so he can tell you exactly what you need and get you the right parts. So that's a plus. So this all came with the kit, but it was purchased separately. So they all came in the same box, which was great. You could buy everything from one supplier. So we're going to go ahead and get the fuel filter bases mounted, and then we're going to go ahead and see which fittings are going to fit our needs. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and get these fittings installed in the pump. Now, we didn't do this on the prior video because I wasn't sure if we were going to have to change these up or not. So we are able to use these. A little bit of lubrication on the O-ring. Make sure you don't screw up the O-ring when installing, which is ideal. And that gets installed in both sides. These are our 11/16. Good and snug is all you need. You don't have to go wild with these because they are an O-ring seal. All right. So keeping note of our out and our in here, we have this bracket here. So we're going to go ahead and mount this on here. Now this is something I had made the other day, and we're going to use this instead of the brackets. Just going to give those a little bit of a snug. All right. And then this bracket, we're going to use factory Marty's. We're going to mount it like so. Now that's just loosely on here. I can still adjust it. And then we're going to go ahead and start installing our fittings on the frame. Now we showed you the fittings that we had earlier here, and we're going to go ahead and use one of those back on the fuel line. Now I'll show you why here in a little bit. Previous video about this, we had our supply and return removed. All right. We are still going to use these factory hard lines. However, the return doesn't need to be modified. So your return is your smaller guy here. So that would be the one on the top. All right. So don't modify that. That can stay just as is. Your supply, however, needs to get cut off. So we're going to go ahead and remove this clamp. So these are a compression style clamp. They are one-time use only. Now, you have two options here, and I had mentioned the fittings before. However, the way that this line is set up, you can go ahead and slide a hose on here and run that to your filters. Now, I wanted to get this opened up here because our filter bases are going to be sitting here. So I wanted to do this first while it was easy to access. Now Marty's line, which is a 3/8 line here, does slide on. It's a little bit big. As you can see, it slides on too far too easily. So we have our original line here. And I have done this before where I would take this line and not remove it from the hard line and run it directly to our feed kit. Now that would require buying a fitting for this. However, we're not going to be doing that this time around. These hoses are old. It doesn't hurt to replace these. So we're going to go ahead and change this out, and we'll get a hose from here to a fitting. But before we go ahead and do that, we're going to go ahead and install our supply line here. So the short hose here is your supply. This will go directly to your filters. So we're going to go ahead and install it onto the selector valve here. You want to put this one on first. Make sure you're seated all the way there, and then you can compress this green clip. Okay, and then give it a little tug, make sure it does not come off. And then you can go ahead and reinstall your return, since we're going to be reusing the factory lines here. Also making sure you install your safety clip there. So this will give us our line here, and this will feed our pump assembly. Just going to stick this here for now. Now I have our filters off of here to make our lives a little bit easier. Go ahead and set this in here. Then we can go ahead and get this installed. Now we are using an existing hole in the frame. And then we previously drilled a hole in each cross member here. You can see it's kind of a difficult process to get these set up the way that I have these set up, but it also lets us mount these filters as high as possible. Now these bolts are just snug so that it doesn't move around. And you can see that this is how we are going to have our setup here. This filter inlet port over here will get this hose from your feed. And this will likely get a 90-degree fitting. All right. Now we'll go ahead and shorten this up. And I am going to keep this loop in here just to make it a little bit easier and also keep it away from the edge of this cross member. Now this side over here, this will run out of here and it will go to this existing line here. So we're doing this to show you the way that this is going to run. Now you can run this here. You could run it down a little bit. You can shorten it up and make a little bit of a belly to go under this, which we still may do. However, we're going to use 290s here. This one will come around and then it will go into this return line down here. Now, you may be asking, why are we doing it where the 90 will run this way? Well, the reason we're doing this is because if we run it the other way here, it runs directly into the carrier bearing. So if you turn this around, there's not enough room for the hose to make the radius and come back this way and go in. So this hose, while it does have a pretty decent bend radius, we don't want to have any issues with any kinking or anything like that. Now, the other option that we could do is we could put another fitting in here to extend this and make a right angle and then also have it come shoot straight back this way. We have our pumps all mounted up here. This is pretty solid now. We've gotten everything tightened up. We have our fittings installed that go directly into the blocks themselves, and we are going to be using a 90 on this inside rail here, and this will go directly to our fuel selector valve, which will be great. I had originally said we might be putting it this way, but I'm pretty sure that we're just going to put it this way to get a straighter shot there and just make sure that we have this indexed so that we don't have any issues with this hose. So we've gotten that covered. The next step is we had talked about the routing of this port here. Now there is a carrier bearing here, and with the carrier bearing being here, that can cause a small issue with the way that I want to run this, because we have this set back a little bit. And the only reason we set this back was to use an existing hole in the frame back here. We could have moved this forward, but it wouldn't have coincided with the hole in the frame. So we didn't want to drill any holes if we didn't have to. Obviously, we had to drill these two holes here, which was not a big deal. So first thing I want to do is I want to try this 120-degree fitting and see how it's going to do. Now, we can index this up a little bit like that. We can index it down a little bit, and there's a very good possibility that this hose will contact the bracket here, or this base. So we may be able to get away with trying to use this piece. We're going to try it and see. I may put a piece of hose on there that's junk just to see how it fits, but you can see it's pretty close. And then here was our 90 that we had possibly anticipated on using. And we can do something like this. Now in this scenario, it puts it out far enough to get past the side of the fuel filter base here, which this is nice. But then you also get the fact that you may have another hose leak here. So I think what we're going to do is we're going to try to use this piece of fitting here, this fitting, and try to put that on there. So we're going to try to do that, I think, first, because this is going to be a less type of leak, less pieces to leak, and it'll give us the idea that we want here. So I'll get a junk piece of hose and try that out. But before we do that, I need to figure out what we're doing with this fuel line down here. Now, if I wanted to use the line that's on the frame here, there's two ways that we can do that. You can take your hose and put it on the original steel line. It is flared, and then you can put a hose clamp on it, and you can do a double clamp opposing directions. I have done that before. It is the cheap alternative method. However, it is a tried and true method that does work. So probably going to end up doing that, and there'll be zero modifications to these factory steel lines, which is great. So might try that first, and then that line would obviously come over to here. However, we're going to go ahead and see what we can get done with this hose down here first. So what I did was I went ahead and removed the straight fitting for the other end of this hose here, because at that point, this will give me an idea of, you can see how much it's spread here. Now, it's a junk piece of hose, so if we do contact at this point, we know that the hose is actually going to be smaller than this because it'll be constricted. All right, but this will give us the idea of how close this is actually going to get to this fuel filter housing. So I don't know how well you can see this here, but there is adequate clearance, even with this hose being as expanded as it is, that it will clear the filter base housing. So that's great news. That's what we want to hear. And then we only have one fitting over here, which is perfect. So what we can do is we're going to plan on using this fitting here. So we'll leave that guy there, which is great. That'll let us run this hose back through here. It'll miss this carrier bearing, miss any of these pieces and parts here. And then this line will mate up to the factory steel line that's under here. It's a little harder to see, but this will be your feed line that runs up to your engine. So that'll be what we are going to do now. We'll go ahead, get this hose ran down into here. Now, the way I like to do this is I'll put the hose on down here, and I can route it up through here, get an approximate length, and then cut it up here and put it all together. So we got our hose here. Now there's two different ways to do this. You have the first way, which is probably the way that most people would do this. You would take your hose clamps and do this. Okay, so this is what you call double clamp opposing. So what you do is you get these clamps put on here, get them slightly away from each other, and what this does is it lets you clamp this down in two opposing ways. It's supposed to give you a better clamping method. The other option you have is you can use a stainless permanent style connection, which would be these clamps here. Now the only way to use these clamps is if with the correct types of pliers. So these are what these are designed for. And these ones will do sideways and front ways. Now you can use these to take off clamps as well. You watch me use these to take off the line before. Now this is probably what I'll end up using on this. These are very, very handy. They're nice. These are a permanent style. These work really, really well, and they will stay looking like this for a very long time as they're stainless. All right. So this is one way we can do this, and this is likely the way that I'm probably going to do this. This is the factory style of doing so. So we have set on here like this, and you basically just take it and push it on the line, and then you take your pliers and you would crimp it down right here. And once you squeeze this together, it won't come off. So we're going to take the hose and run it in the fashion that we would like it to be. And then you'll slide it on the line down here. Now, it's a little bit of a loose fit. However, with the clamp put on, it should tighten up nicely. And then you can kind of run this however long you think it needs to be. Now, we're going to go ahead and set this up, make sure that it's not rubbing anything underneath the carrier bearing, the front of this tank, anything like that. And then make sure that we have enough room here that we could maybe clamp this up to the cross member here. Make sure that it's not going to wiggle and vibrate and everything like that. So that seems to be a good length. There's font on the hose here. So I have an idea of where that's going to be. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this back off and cut this line. Now, try not to butcher this line too much. These are actually cable cutters that I have, and these work really, really well for cutting hose. So you can see that we'll go ahead and cut this. You see it cuts very, very clean, very nice. So now that we've got our section of hose here, we'll go ahead and actually what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this line off. And you would just push these together because this is a push-lock style fitting. And push it all the way in until it won't go any farther. And then you can go ahead and get your line seated back on. You can see that we have some space there. And then we have our line set on down here. So once we get this line set up here, we can go ahead and get it put on down here, and we'll get it clamped on with our pliers here. So I know you weren't able to see what I was doing on the other side of the frame here. So I wanted to show you what I got down here. Now you can see that we clamped the line onto the frame line here, which would ran from the hard fuel line to the fuel filter base. And then you can also see up here that we have our feed line that runs from the base back to the selector valve done. Now, we wanted to make sure that we were going to miss that cross member, so we used the same method for measuring the line as we did on the other side of the bases with the 120-degree fitting. You basically line it up, cut it, and then you push it on. So we did the feed line over here and ran it to the base, and then we also have our nice stainless clamp put on down here as well. And then we have to adjust these lines just a touch here at the very end to make sure that they're not going to be rubbing anything, which is what we're going to do a little bit later. However, everything in the back here is now completely done. Now we have the back all done here. I still have to tighten this fitting up and tighten up that fitting over there. However, I still have to mount this line underneath to the cross member here via some way. I may leave it loose because don't really want to drill any more holes if I don't have to. However, it would be nice to get one hose clamp put up here to hold this up and take any stress off of this fitting. But that's how we're doing the back piece here. It mounts the filters a little bit differently. Lets you get those filters up as high as possible underneath the truck, but it also keeps it out away from the drive shaft as well, which is great. And then we get to reuse the factory lines all the way up through to give it the factory look and feel. So we're going to go ahead and move over to the regulator side and show you what we're going to change up in the valley. So here we are back in the valley. As you can see, we have the regulator removed completely, and we have a return line, this guy here, and our feed line, this guy here. Now this will connect back to your filter bases back at the back, so this will be after the filter base. Now, if we're going to be using these lines, we have to go ahead and cut these off because they're obviously a little bit too long for what we want to do here, especially if we're going to be using a tube nut adapter. This isn't going to work for us. Now, the only thing that I'm probably going to end up doing is cleaning some of this paint off before we put our adapters on, because you want to have a nice clean pipe whenever you're putting those olives on, and make sure that you don't have any corrosion. Make sure you get a nice good compression seat on those. These types of fittings are good for 200 plus psi. I don't know if it's 250, but I wouldn't. The pressures you're going to run here, the aluminum fittings are all you need. If you want to go industrial crazy, something like this high pressure oil line would require, I would use the steel ones, but the aluminum ones for this are perfectly fine. So we're going to go ahead and I'm going to get these cleaned up as much as I can and then go ahead and cut those. You can see here I've been using some old sandpaper I had here. I think this is 320. I didn't want to go too crazy with the grit because you don't want to be marking this up too badly, but you can see that they're pretty filthy still. So you want to make sure you get a good seat on these, and all this rust and crap that's on there is not conducive to that. So we have these pretty well cleaned up here. We're going to go ahead and cut our bottom one first. It'll be the easiest one to get to. Just use a little tiny tubing cutter for these. So that's our bottom one cut here. And then we're going to come up here and do the top one. I always do the bottom one first because the piece sticking up kind of gets in the way. And I had said previously in another video that we don't have this clamp back here. You can see that it's not there. So that gives you the freedom to move these around. So if you need to move these around, you can take that clamp out that's not there, and gives you free rein on moving these around. So we have both of these cut here. This is why I wanted to do the cleaning first, because then the cutter rolls nicely on these. And then if you can, you always want to try to stagger these joints. And you can see if we were to be able to put these back in their clamps, that they'd be staggered a little bit, which is what you want. Okay, so you could always cut this one a little bit shorter if you needed to, but this should be good for us. I might have to give this line a little bit of a bend to keep it away from this IPR, since we don't have the bracket here. But these lines will move a little bit for you. They're steel, they'll bend a little bit, but these are pretty forgiving, which is nice. So you can kind of move them around where they need to. But I sometimes have cut them up high, like up here. But on this one, we're going to be doing down here, be a little bit easier for us to access and get everything tightened down. Now, if you have a way to deburr the inside of these, I would suggest doing that. So I have a little deburring tool here, and it's not going to work super well, but it'll do the job. Okay, now that you've done this, you want to blow these lines out. So whatever connection you can disconnect to remove these from their system, you want to blow these out. So we have them disconnected down on the frame here. So I'm going to go ahead and blow these out with some compressed air. So we got these disconnected here. You can also go ahead and you can file these edges a little bit if you want to. If you're going to do that, make sure that you blow out the lines after you do that as well. And you might be wondering, why are we deburring and blowing this out? So you can see that there's some edging in here on the inside of this tube. So the deburring tool will get rid of those pieces that may free themselves up over time. So you don't want those pieces to end up in your fuel system at all, especially after your filters. And then blowing out the lines ensures that you got any pieces of dust or dirt that were in here that can really screw up your injectors out. So you don't want any of this in your fuel lines after your filters, especially. So we're going to take our tube adapters here. Now you have two different sizes. All right. You see the one in my right hand is a little bit smaller than the one in my left hand. So this one's 5/16, this one's 3/8. Now these are going to go to a -6 sized fitting. So we're going to start with the bottom one first. So we'll use the small one first. Now we're going to be careful here because we've got pieces and parts. So you unscrew the fitting out. Okay. It looks like a port fitting, but it's not. Inside you have, now they call this an olive. All right, this olive will slide down onto this tube here, but you want to make sure you put your collar on first. So the collar will go on first. And this is why you want to make sure you have a section of pipe here, because if you would have did this back here, you'd have had problems with this elbow. Slide your olive on. You can see the olive on there. Now take your fitting, install it, and then slide the whole thing forward and screw it together. Okay. Now, as you can see here, it still spins. Now, you want to make sure that this fitting is buried all the way onto that pipe. So we have these tight here and does not spin. You can bend these lines however you need to bend them if you need to bend them. Okay, so we don't have this clamp back here. I got to try to find a source for one. However, them being like this, we might be able to clamp them down and give them a little bit of a tweak out. However, now we can go ahead and attach our lines to these. All right, so our feed line here, this top one, is going to go directly down here. So we're going to go ahead and see what we need to make these two come together. So this is why I bought extra fittings, because I may end up using different types of fittings in different types of places. So this 45 is pretty good for here, but it may not work with the 90 down here, but it may. However, I want to try a 45 and see if these actually look like they're going to be looking at each other here. So as you can see, they don't quite look at each other. So the 90 is going to be better down here. So then we have a nice little arc of hose here, which is nice. And then if we ran a straight here, it wouldn't do as well because we have to interfere with this intake plenum here. So we're going to go ahead and get a piece of hose made up for in here. But before I make this hose, I want to look and see how this is going to fit on here. Now, the way we're doing this here, we'll more than likely have the hose come out like this. And we'll come up, it'll do a bend. Now, we could use another 120-degree fitting here, but it's not necessarily needed because we have room to make a loop, all right? But, I wanted to see how this was going to look in here. So we'll go ahead, remove this out of the way for now, and we'll go ahead and figure out what we need for a hose length for this guy here. So once again, we're using the hose that Marty supplied. It is a Parker Push-lok Plus hose. And you can kind of get an idea of what you need by lining this up. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this one off and get it fully seated on here. Okay, so just like we did with all the other hoses, take it and just push and turn. All right. Now you can see we don't have any lines on the other side of this hose. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get a marker and mark this hose where it needs to be. And then I'll take that fitting off and take the fitting off down here, cut this hose and put them together. So just a little mark there. And I looked at it from this angle, and you don't want to look at it from this angle. You want to get a good accurate mark on that. So go ahead and pull this back out. Got our hose cut here. We used our cable cutters again. Go ahead and take this line off and push it on. So you can spin these lines inside the hose. Just try not to spin it, repeatedly. So you try to get it indexed correctly when you push it on here. Like I said, you can spin them a little bit if you want. Sometimes they'll push all the way on real easy. And once it's pushed together here, you can see we have pretty close to our correct orientation. We'll go ahead and get it put on here. All right, we still have to tighten these up, but that hose is our feed hose. So definitely still going to try and find a clamp for in here. But for now, we can go ahead, get our regulator mounted, and what that'll do is that'll give us an idea on where we need to make this hose go and how long it needs to be. So here we are, we have our regulator here. Now we put this together in part 1 of the video. We still haven't tightened any of these fittings up yet because we don't know our indexing yet. However, I did mention this little bracket that I made. So this will hold the regulator instead of this little guy. Okay, so you can see we can still move these around a little bit. And then we have a nice little bracket here to hold this, and we'll go ahead and get this installed. All right, so this is not a great viewing angle here. Don't have too many places I can set the camera where I really want to show you what I'm doing here. I'm going to pull this wire off for the gauge for the pressure sensor, the oil pressure sensor here. Now we are running the riffraff high capacity spacer under this reservoir, so we have our Allen keyed bolts at the top here. If you're running a factory setup with the original reservoir and bolts, and you'll have a bracket here, a metal bracket. There'll be a stud sticking out of here, and then a bracket, and then 2 nuts that hold that bracket on. You can mount a bracket like I'm doing over that and use the existing studs, or you can remove that bracket or modify that bracket and then make your own bracket, however you want to see fit. However, this is how I do these. Now we're going to go ahead and remove these bolts. I'm going to put this wire back on because it needs to be on anyway. So we got these bolts removed, pull these out. The bracket that we had made goes on right here. A little cutout for the wire to pass through because we aren't using anything else underneath this. All right, so we have a regulator mount here, which is nice. So this gets this up where you can see it without crawling up in the engine bay. And then we can go ahead and attach our original return lines. Now we are using the factory return lines here. And you can see I had left those fittings a little bit loose so we could index them as needed. So you can see here that we can get these pushed down a little bit to where they're comfortable. The light's kind of messing up your view here. You can get these pushed down to where they're comfortable with your line down here. Make sure it's not rubbing anything. Same thing on the other side. You can't really see it that well. And we're going to go ahead and tighten these down. Kind of go ahead and get started on this side that you can kind of see. So you want to hold your fitting and then tighten your line. Once you tighten up that line and make sure that it's happy, you can go ahead and tighten your jam nut here. And you see that line doesn't want to move anymore. Repeat on your other side. So this is our return lines. And if you were using the Marty's replacements, you would be doing the same exact thing here. And this line's pretty well relaxed. This one's not too bad over here either. And we have a small little bend in this metal plate. And if we decided that these lines weren't real happy the way they are, we could actually modify this plate some more to get these down a little bit, or you can actually just bend this plate some more to get a little bit more of a bend to it, get them lines a little more relaxed. So that's an option as well. But this is where I wanted this. And now we can go ahead and put our line from the elbow down here that we haven't quite installed yet to the line on the bottom of this regulator. So the way that this works is your fuel runs from your line to your block, into the heads, through the return lines, back to the regulator. From this regulator, they go through the bottom of the regulator, and it'll return back to your line here, back to the tank. So that is the process of fluid of the way that this works. So the bottom of this regulator has that straight fitting. We're just going to thread this elbow on here, and then we have the 90 down here. I'm going to tighten it up a little bit. Now, like I had said before, you could probably use a 210 degree fitting or 220 and come back around, and it would point a lot more towards this. However, with the space required to do what we need to do here, there is enough space between this fitting and this fitting up here that hose will make that turn. So what we're going to start with is we're going to start by putting the hose on this fitting down here, and then we'll be able to mark it up here really easy. So go ahead and push your line on your fitting here. We'll go ahead and thread it on. Now you can see that this line, that'll work like that. It's a little bit too long. It's rubbing down here on this boss that would be mounted on the fuel pressure regulator earlier. You can see it down here. All right, so we're going to shorten this hose up a little bit, and that'll give us a nice little loop here. And in doing that, it allows you a little bit more freedom to work in here if you needed to work on anything, and you're not going to be having to have a line directly in your way like it would be here for doing any service to your IPR. So we want this to be just a little bit long, and you can even turn this fitting up here a little bit like this. It doesn't need to be straight. You can turn it out here a little bit to give you a little bit more room to work on anything in the future. So that's a nice point about doing the regulator this way. It gives you some freedom. So I think I like the hose the way that it's routed here. It's just long enough to make it up, not really long enough to catch anything. If we end up mounting this the way we like to over here, it still gives you some freedoms. So now that we have our hose the way we want it, go ahead and give it a mark, and we can go ahead and cut it. Now we'll go ahead and install our fitting on the hose. Okay, so we still need to tighten all these fittings up, and we also need to run our electrical system. However, we obviously don't have a truck to run the electrical system, but we will eventually hotwire this pump and test all of these fittings before we wire everything up permanently. It's a lot easier to test your fuel system this way. It's a nice option to have. You know, we can put some fuel in the system, put the tank in, put the fuel in the tank, and then pressurize the whole system up. And then we can actually come back and check for leaks with anything. Now, before you finish up your install here, you want to make sure that you either de-pin this harness a little bit and plug your IPR back in, or you can go ahead and tape this whole harness up, you know, make one big loom out of it, and then plug your IPR back in. Because if you don't plug this in, your truck's not going to run. So that's something to keep in mind. This is the third part of the e-fuel install for Brent's truck here. Now, we did some different stuff with this than what Marty sends the kit out as, but we're going to go through and get a clamp put on there and tighten up all these connections and then give them a test fit. And then we'll go ahead and I'll show you another time a video on how to wire these up into a factory box. So like I said, we have another video. It's either up or will be coming that will have a custom fuel filter or fuel install done on a truck. And it'll be very, very, very similar to this setup. However, the wiring will be shown in that for this type of setup. And we're going to use a lot of Marty's on this truck, but we don't have a truck to put it in yet. So, you know, we got to get the cab set back on and get all the wiring put in before we can even remotely think about setting this up with the wiring. So this is the end of this video here. I hope that this gives you guys some ideas on customly mounting your Marty's e-fuel kit. This is something that we wanted to do for Brent and make it a little bit custom for him, a little bit special, you know, something unique to him. But you know, that's how I like to do these filter bases and filters and the way that I like to mount the regulators. And, you know, like I said, we reuse the OBS lines up here and, you know, they're going to be good, you know, not going to cause any issues. But, you know, we got to tighten up our fittings here and do some double checks and pressure check the system. But other than that, that'll be it for this video. So if you guys like this video and want to see more stuff like this, you know, please like the video, like the page, and then also, you know, if you could subscribe to my channel, I'd really appreciate it, and keep watching all my videos. You know, it helps me keep doing stuff like this. So thanks for watching, guys, and we'll catch you on the next one.